Instead of returning home after the dance, Kelly Taylor drove to her office. A lover's moon hung over Cathedral Rock, illuminating the magnificent spire and the surrounding red rock formations. The blue-white glow cast deep shadows across the unique Pueblo-style buildings, making the adobe appear a shade darker than it did in daylight. At times like this, when most of Sedona was asleep and the only sound was the lonely, soul-stirring cry of a coyote seeking its mate, Kelly missed the big city. Arizona had been her home for most of her 31 years. She lived in the East for the last decade, attending college, then working in New York City. Returning to Sedona, even though its quaint beauty appealed to her, took some adjusting. She parked her temperamental Toyota in the newspaper's lot. The only noise came from the rear of the Adobe complex where the antiquated press was cranking out the bi-weekly edition of the Sedona Sun. Inside, Kelly dropped her evening bag onto her desk, then rifled through her messages, thinking she should go home. But deeply ingrained habits were hard to break. For as long as she could remember, she had slept until almost noon, then worked all night. Her usual schedule did not allow for time with Pop, and time had become all too precious. "Go home now," she muttered to herself. "Set your alarm for sunrise so you can have breakfast with Pop." A sharp, insistent knock interrupted her thoughts, echoing through the deserted building. A warning bell sounded in the back of her brain. Who would come to the newspaper office at this hour? The second knock caused the skin on the back of her neck to tighten. She walked out of her small office into the semi-dark day room where two reporters shared a desk near the receptionist's bay. Sedona was a safe town, a haven for artists and writers who believed the majestic red rock formations inspired them. Along with the artists came the wealthy, drawn too by the awesome landscape and the ambience of the culture community. She paused, her hand on the doorknob. What was wrong with her? She wasn't the type who had premonitions. Well, the day after Christmas, she would go to the sales, absolutely, positively certain she'd find something she simply could not live without. But that was it, the extent of her premonitions. Even when she should have sensed something was wrong, like the time she kissed Daniel goodbye, or when she'd used an unreliable source, her intuition had failed to kick in. So why now? For heaven's sake, this isn't New York or LA, she whispered to herself. Everything's fine. The rustle of sound beyond the door unnerved her, and she hesitated a second before she turned the knob. In the shadows stood a tall, handsome man with dark hair and lively brown eyes. "Matt!" she cried, stunned. "What are you doing here?" He pulled her into his arms and gave her a hug that filled her with bittersweet sadness for the time when they'd been inseparable. BD, she thought, before Daniel. "Hey, Ace," Matthew Jensen said. "Why didn't you dress like this when we were working together?"